Hey everybody, here we are at the beginning of another week, and we had a great time this weekend in worship together, and if you were there, I'm sure you enjoyed it, and if you weren't, wish you were there, but hopefully we'll see you sometime in the not too distant future. What I wanted to talk about is, again, another dynamic that's going on that has been pretty prevalent over the last few weeks, ever since the death of George Floyd, by a Minneapolis police officer. A lot of things have happened, and it starts out as basically protesting the unjustified death of a innocent man, or a man at least who was not deserving of that kind of treatment. And it has metastasized into something else. We all know that many places the protesters have taken over, riots have broken out, a lot of things have been destroyed, and in a way silencing the very message that many of those who were protesting was trying to make. But what's most confounding is that you find that there has risen to the surface, really at least the attention of the media, what we might basically call anarchists. And an anarchist, to quote one of them, just simply says, you have to tear everything down before you can rebuild. And I thought it's interesting because this young person who was saying this, speaking on behalf of Black Lives Matter and probably Antifa as well, basically doesn't have any understanding of what that even means, because it would be like me saying, I need to tear your house down before I can rebuild it. And what I'm going to rebuild is going to be so much better than the one you had before. You might have a few questions for me like, well, do you have any money to rebuild? Well, no. Have you ever built anything before like this? No. Do you have any skills at all? No. Do you know anybody who can help you? Well, no. You might say, then you can't tear my house down. Essentially, we have these young people who want to destroy, who themselves have never built anything. In fact, the profile psychologically of the young people is really pretty fascinating, because basically I did some research saying what kind of people become part of Black Lives Matter and Antifa, and what kind of person is attracted. And they basically said that they're mainly people who have serious identity issues. In other words, we live in a culture where identity has been turned into a commodity. I see people on TV sometimes and their job title is social influencer. In other words, they're on Twitter all the time, or Facebook, or something like that. I mean, it's like, what is that? And we have a whole desire to be famous just to be famous, and people are famous for being famous. We have celebrities that are just simply celebrities because somewhere along the line we've decided they're celebrities. They've never done anything, they've never accomplished anything, they've never written a book, they've never made a movie. They just have this place of being on a reality show, and now they're a celebrity. It's a very strange dynamic, and yet what we have is a culture that has come to believe, especially amongst a lot of young people, that they're born privileged. And what they mean by being born privileged is the very fact that they exist, they deserve to be taken care of. They deserve a lot of free stuff. And basically, when they grew up and maybe went to college and got their degree in social science or in poetry, and then they went to look for a job and they found that IBM doesn't want to hire any poets. Microsoft isn't interested in poets, and they don't have the job skills. There's a huge collapse and feeling like I've been betrayed, I've been set up, society has betrayed me. Well, this is kind of the profile of a lot of these people, that they really have come to a crisis in terms of who am I and what is my life about. And when they can go out and riot and demonstrate and so forth, it gives them a real sense, a real boost that they're doing something meaningful, even though they'll look back one day and realize they did nothing but probably cause a lot of harm. They certainly didn't have any huge social impact. But the thing also that stands out is, you notice, especially with these groups, that they're wearing face masks, and are intellectually challenged government leaders often say, isn't it wonderful that they're wearing face masks to keep themselves safe from spreading the virus? But they were wearing those face masks long before COVID-19 1984 came along. They wear those masks and continue to wear them not for health or safety, but to disguise their real identity. That's been the practice of these groups since they began a few years ago. They basically find that they can hide themselves within the group. They get a kind of an autonomy, and anything you do within the mob no longer becomes your personal responsibility. If I throw a Molotov cocktail at a police officer, I'm just part of the mob, and you can't blame me. At least that's their attempt. And somehow they are able to kind of not take moral responsibility for their actions. And that's the nature of mobs. I remember in college in sociology studying mob mentality, and that's the nature of a mob. You do things in a mob setting that you would never do if you were just by yourself, because you couldn't hide what you were doing as being wrong. But when you're in a group that's doing something wrong, if you're in a group that's burning a city down, they can say, well, it wasn't really me, it was that group. And so that's part of the idea. They like that anonymity hiding within the group. And the third thing is, they love to accuse people of racism or being fascist. Antifa means anti-fascist, which is kind of funny because they use the most fascistic techniques in order to get rid of fascism, which tells me these people aren't real sharp. I mean, they probably don't own a dictionary and don't know how to use Google, because if they look up the word fascism, they probably see their face right there. What they're doing are the most fascistic techniques and actions you could possibly imagine. But they like to yell, racism. And what racism as an accusation is kind of a canard in this day and age. It's basically a canard is an unfounded rumor or story. I mean, they call people racists because they simply disagree with them. If you disagree with them, you hit them with the boogeyman that you are a prejudiced, bigoted racist. And the thing about that accusation, it's kind of intangible. It's certainly not something that you can really put your hands around, but you sure can exploit other people's emotions with it. And that's the idea. If I just give you that label, that's proof in itself. It's like what we used to say years ago. It was kind of a joke, but we'd say to somebody, hey, have you stopped beating your wife? Now, if the guy says no, then he has admitted to being a wife beater in the past. If he says yes, then he's admitted to be a wife beater in the present. The whole point is you can't answer that right. It's a question that simply is there to indict you, not to clarify or communicate anything that's true. And this calling of racism is really taking the whole argument someplace where you can never satisfy their claim. You can never say anything that they want. It's kind of like some of the stores that posted, "We support Black Lives Matter," and basically they were criticized for not having done that earlier. And the ones who didn't post it were criticized because they were supporting racism. So these businesses were trying to avoid becoming the focal point of accusation, but there was no way for them to avoid it, because the whole purpose is to demean, tear you down, destroy, and intimidate you until finally you will allow them to do whatever you want. Now, the reason I say all this is because this has a biblical implication. In fact, in Matthew 24:9, Jesus, speaking of the last times, or at least what things would be like leading up to the end, he said, they will deliver you to tribulation. In other words, if you're a Christian, you're going to go through some troublous times. And I think we're seeing the beginnings of those troublous times right now, in my opinion. And they said, and will kill you. We can expect martyrdom to begin to take place. That one guy was trying to preach down in the city of Chop or Chaz or whatever it's called, and he just got pummeled by all these Antifa and BLM people showing him love and dragging him off and kicking him and so forth, because he was trying to share the gospel. They didn't want Christ in that space whatsoever. It goes on and says, you will be hated by all nations because of my name. That Christians will eventually become a byword and a mocking and a criticism. They'll view us as being mentally unstable or mentally undeveloped and intellectually limited. And they'll go and say, and because of that, what's going to happen is that there's some within the Christian community, said, who will betray one another and hate one another. And we even see that happening. I just heard from one pastor, he's talking about how they're having a staff meeting on Zoom, and one of the pastors spent 30 minutes confessing and repenting of his white privilege. And he said it was the most crazy thing in the world, like white privilege. That's one of those terms that has no real meaning to it. What is white privilege? I mean, I can guarantee you, today's world, if a black man and a white man both apply for the same job, and the black man is just as qualified as the white man, the black man's going to get the job. Because there's this favoring of racial preferences within our system. My brother, when he went to college, you know what he listed himself as? Now, I got to tell you, my name is Ortiz. We're from Basque descent, but I have more German and French in me than anything else. And he put down Ortiz, and when it said, what is your race? He put Hispanic. You know why? He said, I knew I would get a better chance of getting into college. if I did that, into pharmacy school. And sure enough, he did. So basically, this whole idea of white privilege, I don't think exists. I think there are prejudices out there, don't get me wrong, and there's some really weird, sick people. But there are no real inherent advantages anymore because the playing field has become increasingly more level. When I hear people complaining about an uneven playing field, I wonder if they even know how to play the game. Now, he goes on and he adds, he says, many false prophets will arise and mislead many. Do you ever think about these politicians and these Antifa and Black Lives Matter leaders as being false prophets who are misleading people? And then he tells us what the proof is. How can we tell if the false prophet is the one who's giving leadership? He says, because lawlessness is increased, and most people's love will grow cold, but the one who endures to the end will be saved. So what is the proof that we're being influenced by false prophets? The increase literally means exponentially increase. Suddenly there's an explosion of what? Lawlessness. The word lawlessness is anomia in the Greek, and it means to behave in complete disregard of the laws and regulations of society and also the laws of God. It's to refuse to obey any orders that you don't want to obey and live as if you despise all laws and restrictions. That's exactly what we see going on, is that they don't care anymore. Whatever they feel is their law. Well, there's a lot more I could say about what's going on with these kind of people, but I think we need to understand that what we're seeing here is some of what the Bible said would be the signs of the end times. And many of us had made the mistaken conclusion that if we just follow Jesus, we would just go from better to better and more and happier and happier. And yet the Bible very clearly says that we will suffer for the cause of Christ. And we need to arm our minds with that reality and not be afraid to speak up and call sin, sin, evil, evil, darkness, darkness, and give people the Word of God and truth and light. I'm out of time. God bless you. Hope you're having a great start to your week.